Welcome to the Cyber Call, the podcast by Ride of Boom for managed service providers looking to stay ahead in an ever-changing world of cybersecurity. Each week, we dive into the latest threats, trends, and real-world strategies to help MSPs protect their clients and grow their businesses. Let's build a safer, stronger community together.
Happy Monday, everybody. Welcome to the Cyber Call. We've got a great one today. As always, we will give it a few minutes to let people come in. Looks like Synergy Solutions is out there. And if you guys could just give us a quick chat or two to make sure audio, video coming through. Hey, Ed, good morning, is coming, all A-OK your way. And while we do that, let's kick it off with a touch of banter as we do every week. And let me share out my entire screen. And again, Eric, if you could just keep me honest here that I'm moving to the Hacker News to start.
Yep, looks great.
All right, perfect. Okay. So, by the way, kudos to Tom Lawrence. I think Tom's over at Huntress now, Chris, possibly. I believe he's over there. But he did a great video on this. There's been a lot of articles just in the last week about this gentleman named Peter Stokes. I believe that's his name, right, Chris?
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
Yeah, Peter Stokes. This 19-year-old kid that is part of Scattered Spider. And interestingly, as you read about Scattered Spider, Chris, it appears this group is not just one group, but it's like all these syndicates, and very hard to go, well, we got Scattered Spider. It's almost like, these cells, maybe a poor analogy, but
alliances. Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of that kind of activity going out there today where these groups are kind of aligning and then falling under one umbrella. But yeah, they're very, what would you say? Not totally disparate, but yeah, they're loosely connected.
Right. And those cells keep the ability for the whole to keep going, Chris, right? It's almost like in Iran, the way, they have all the different cells attacking, that you could take out a cell, but the rest can still operate autonomously. It's kind of that same mantra. Few things to note here. So this 19-year-old was captured and extradited back from Finland to the United States, and had a court hearing last week in Illinois for allegedly, hasn't been fully convicted, obviously, but allegedly doing a cyber attack into a retail jewelry store, etc. Now, what's interesting about this, Chris, that I just want to basically start with you and talk about is, first off, again, for MSPs, what's really notable about Scattered Spider's techniques is using their impersonation to get help desks to turn over things. Now, again, this is the same group that was responsible for MGM and many other types of large-scale attacks. And so, having controls around giving out information in your help desk is, has never been more critical. What I would like to just jump to, Chris, real quick, and I can put all these articles in chat momentarily, and I have it over here, the actual filing, which I'll show momentarily with the Justice Department. But this is identifier by Microsoft, where it appears Microsoft, saw this activity going on and basically got it, packaged together and hands it over to the FBI and says, hey, this guy's up to no good, for lack of a better word. Here's all the information we have that can validate that this guy's using VPNs and proxy servers and things to attack. And we're pretty sure it's this individual, as we can track it back to this actual person. Last but not least, like I said, here's the actual court documents, which I'll send out to everybody. This is a great article. Anyway, this is a great article here by Group IB, which talks about Scattered Spider as a whole. So I'll get all those in chat. But Chris, kicking it off to you, give us some thoughts on this as somebody that has dealt with a lot of threat actors over the years. And, one, is this some precedence that Microsoft might just start getting more involved in threat actor activity and using these identifiers?
Well, it's interesting, right? So the thing about this one is when you install a piece of software, it assigns this global identifier, and so if the threat actor changes a computer or does something different, or installs the app somewhere else, they're going to get a new identifier. In this particular case, this individual installed this app in Grok and then used it and continued to use it. So then they were able to track that activity and relate it back to that global identifier, which is that global device identifier, which is super important. And so I'm not going to say, hey, this guy made a mistake in what he did, but he did leave a trail of breadcrumbs that maybe others would not have. And he got snagged as a result. And Microsoft had access to that information, so they supplied it to the authorities. And we're seeing more and more of these prosecutions. I mean, we had the guy that used to work for Digital Mint. He just got prosecuted for helping a threat actor, and he got 70 months in prison for that. So it is really nice to see, because it's very hard first to identify these people and then to identify them in a country where you can extradite them out of here. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that they were able to catch this guy, maybe because he's 19, he was a little green, but that's what happened here.
Interesting. Phyllis, with when the agency back in the day, and you just hypothesizing today, is there that intersection with commercial business like Microsoft to help pull these people down, get intel, and how does that fine line work when we're talking about the federal government?
So first off, I came from the National Security Agency. We were not. NSA is not law enforcement.
Fair.
There's a very distinct delineation there. Is there cooperation with public and private? For sure. Across, all the different agencies, with law enforcement, even with intel agencies, of course. I want to emphasize again, the NSA does not collect any data on U.S. citizens, period. They spend millions and millions of dollars to prevent that from
happening. Did you wink there when you said that, or no?
No.
She's got these behind her back.
Exactly. I saw Chris's head turn a little bit.
But it does. But federal agencies do ask private companies for help, and private companies ask the federal agencies for help, and for national security, but also it's good for business, right? And I think about this kind of reminds me of banks. So banks have kind of fail safes built into their system to detect fraudulent activity, right? And they'll, if my credit card, simple example is when my credit card is being used in multiple states at the same time or within a certain period, then the credit card company will notify you, or if the bank sees fraudulent kind of transactions, for certain individuals, then they'll flag that or whatever. And so it's kind of nice to see this from a company saying, oh, we see this activity, we think we should inform law enforcement, and in this case, the FBI. So it's nice to see that a big company sees law enforcement as a place to go to versus a place to avoid.
Yeah.
I mean, really, because that's often the case.
Yeah.
Is no one wants to go to the FBI for whatever reason. But yes, I would say this public-private, not necessarily partnership, but just kind of cooperation definitely has happened.
Cool. Well, we'll introduce you shortly, but any comments or thoughts on this when you look at these types of indictments? And, you mentioned off air before we got on, these help desk ruse are certainly something you've seen a lot of.
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I'm just a little cynical, but it seems like no matter how many people they arrest, there's 10 more that take their position and they're spotted. It's a bit like whack-a-mole, especially this particular group is so not that organized or, not that tightly knit together. So, it's nice to see it. It's nice to see one, but I don't know how much of a difference it's really going to make until we see a much broader type arrest pattern. And so I think the sharing of information is great. I think it would be great if we could see it a little bit more, but frankly, until law enforcement is making a lot more arrests, and I don't know if in the US right now they have capacity to do that, I don't know how much of an impact it's overall going to have on the number of attacks that we see across the board.
Yeah, fair. Eric, any closing comments before we kick it off?
No, I just echo everything Melissa said, and I think this discussion today will certainly shine a light on this.
Cool. All right, let's get on into it. So here's how today started off. Melissa was a new star at Right Up Boom 2026. She had on literally Friday morning, the last day of the event, had 2 sessions at the event, and unanimously the advisory council was like, "Hey, we really got to get Melissa back." So I reached out. We were catching up, and I said, as we talked about 2027, what that could look like, I said, we've never had you on the cyber call. Are you tracking anything interesting right now? And lo and behold, Melissa said, yeah, you know what? One thing I am working several cases is this murky onboarding, offboarding with MSPs where, their scopes of work and MSAs are a little bit gray and loose in terms of who owns the responsibility when one MSP is, wrapping things up and offboarding a client and another is onboarding, and lo and behold, a threat actor is introduced. And in a few of these cases, both MSPs are being sued. And I thought it was something that we really need to talk about. Eric and I have been talking specifically about things that he's working on right now in MSAs and scopes of work on all of his client renewals for AI, which will be a session at Right Boom as well. So as far as the co-hosts, I thought it was really important to bring in Eric and Chris along with Phyllis as always. So with that, Melissa, thanks for joining. And for those that may not know you, can you tell us a little about yourself and what you do over there at Clark Hill?
Yeah, so I am the business unit leader of Clark Hill's data privacy cybersecurity business unit. We've handled, I stopped counting at some point, 5,000, 6,000 security incidents, data breach, ransomware attacks. I can't believe somebody did that with the system. So very well versed in the attack vectors and what happens in this particular industry. Do represent a lot of MSPs, unfortunately, when they have some issues or their customers do. Personally, I did 21 years in the Marine Corps, active duty and reserves. Retired as a logistics officer. I wanted to lead Marines, not prosecute them. And trust me, there's lots of opportunities to prosecute them. So bring some of that to the this space as well. So thanks for having me. Happy to talk about this particular topic.
Awesome to have you, and thanks so much for your service. And just word of note for our guests, our co-hosts, if you have a Windows keeps dinging, can you close that by chance? That'd be awesome. All right, Eric, I'll let you kick things off here, Melissa.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I appreciate it. So, Melissa, welcome to the Cyber Call. I know you've spent a lot of time on the incident response side at Clark Hill, so you've seen a lot. And as Andrew mentioned, when this security incident or breach or data exfiltration happens at the point between an outgoing and an incoming MSP, what's the first question you find yourself asking that people have a really, really tough time answering?
What's your contract say? Because most people, especially on the offboarding, the onboarding, they're a little bit more familiar because they've worked through it. It's relatively new, but especially in the offboarding, they haven't gone back and looked at the contract. They haven't outlined in writing really what the offboarding is going to look like. They haven't scoped out what who's responsible for what, or when the turnover happens, or who is assuming whatever the next responsibilities are. So frankly, I often ask for the contract, and I am no longer surprised when they really don't have anything in those documents about whatever the particular process is that they're going through.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so if you think about the MSP's contracts, what does your contract say? Most MSAs and most statements of work talk about everything but what happens on handoff. So in your experience, is this simply an oversight? Is it people just don't want to get into it? Is it that people don't want to talk about the divorce before they get married? What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't think anyone really wants to talk about the divorce before they get married, but everybody should have a good, strong prenup in place. I also think it's difficult, especially when you're talking about offboarding, to have that kind of documentation in place when the relationship starts, because you can be in that relationship for several years, and what the systems look like at the beginning isn't what it's going to look like at the end. Instead, what I recommend is having a mechanism for outlining what that process looks like when you do the offboarding. So outlining the key points that, hey, when we've decided that the relationship is no longer working and you decide to terminate services, we will execute a separate statement of work that outlines the offboarding process. That will include X, Y, and Z. And then you've got a mechanism for actually putting that in place when, the relationship is essentially terminated.
Eric, can I poke on you there? Because this is something that you find yourself, fortunately or unfortunately, involved in a lot of litigation on one side, and then sometimes having to throw it over the wall to Melissa on the other. But what is it like? How do you make sure, or how do you try to educate your MSPs about, post pandemic, when security controls just proliferated at a monstrous rate, 20 tools to 70 tools, new services, but we're mid-contract and we're doing all these things, and we don't want to do things that maybe risk our indemnification. How do you do those things to keep yourself safe?
It's a good question, and there's a lot of complexity there, right? And it's a matter of, if you really try to simplify it, it's when are we responsible as an MSP for the health and safety of your network? And when are we no longer responsible as an MSP for the health and safety of your network? And there are both, incoming and outgoing mechanisms that you can deploy, but you have to talk about it. And you have to talk about it, to Melissa's point, up front. You got to do the prenup such that when it happens, right? Because no relationship lasts for forever, at least in this industry. And there's going to come a time when your customer is going to find someone else for whatever reason to be their MSP. And on the incoming side, if I'm representing an MSP who's about to undertake a new client, I can't tell you how many times. It's less than 10% of the time when I look at their contract before I've worked with them on it that it addresses it. Sometimes it'll say that we're responsible when you sign it, right? If Melissa's my client and I'm the MSP, and I say, here, Melissa, sign this managed services statement of work. Here's all the good stuff we're going to do, and then Melissa signs it. Well, are we responsible for it today? Are we responsible for it tomorrow? Are we responsible for it 3 months from now? Right? Those are all the things that from an incoming MSP perspective, you have to contract for. And then on the outgoing side, it's okay, where do we draw the line where we aren't responsible anymore? Right? Is it when we turn over the admin credentials? Is it simply at the end of our 36-month term? All that stuff has to be figured out before you start.
Let me ask a question real quick. Sorry, on this, Eric. I know you see, there's two prevailing things that happen in the MSP world. Either A, another MSP comes in and takes over, or B, an acquisition occurs and internal IT from the acquiring party takes. Do you have to treat those things kind of differently in a way, or are they kind of it's the same scenario no matter what happens?
In my world, it's really no different. And Melissa may disagree with me, but whether it's going to another MSP or whether it's going internal or whether it's going to become now a co-managed instead of a fully managed situation, that even gets a little bit hairier. But if it's simply going from fully managed to no management, it doesn't matter whether it's going to an internal IT or to another MSP.
Anytime anyone else is going to touch that system, you have to carefully delineate who is responsible for what. The other part I will add in is you have to communicate that. If you're saying, let's say in your contracts when you first execute them, it has in there, if we provide admin credentials, we're no longer responsible for anything, or you take over the dashboard or something like that. And then they ask for the admin credentials. I'll tell you what, they're not going back to the contract and looking at it. So if something happens, the first person they're blaming is you as the MSP, even if your contract is clear. that you are no longer responsible because they asked for and received the admin credentials. So I would say that communication piece is incredibly important during these relationships because you're doing a handoff. You don't want to drop the baton in the middle that,
Yeah. And to Melissa's earlier point, we're talking about contracting today for something that might happen 3 years or 6 years or 10 years down the road. And that's really, really hard. So if you get to the point where you are going to be offboarding a longtime customer, definitely pull out the contract and see what it says, because a lot of things may have changed since 3, 6, 10 years ago.
Eric, I do have another question, but Senor Los Gatos, I'm glad he asked this question in chat. Is there sample language of an offboarding policy to use as a template? And why I'm really glad about this is, can you talk about templates and simple language and why it is so incredibly dangerous and why MSPs get themselves in trouble? And no disrespect to Senor Los Gatos. I'm glad you asked it, honestly.
I'll disrespect him. That's okay. No, I'm just kidding. No, don't use templates. Don't use MSAs or SOWs that you got from your peer group, your, whomever, your insurance provider. Talk to a well-qualified attorney who can draft these and have these agreements match your practices. Don't have your practices try to line up with whatever agreement you come across.
It's almost like
the problem with templates and kind of formulaic policies is they don't match what you're doing. And in policies and templates and contracts, words have meanings. So one sentence in there can negate what you think you're protecting yourself from because it is a template and it was intended for a slightly different use than what you're going to use it from. Unfortunately, in kind of the world of litigation that we're in, even if you have limitation of liability type language in your contract, there are some states that allow companies to get outside the terms of the limitation of liability by alleging gross negligence. Now, not all do. But we are seeing more demands and allegations where they're alleging that, hey, I relied on you, MSP, for securing my systems, and there wasn't X, Y, and Z in place, and that was grossly negligent because you were supposed to secure the systems, even if they declined to have whatever that particular tool was deployed. So
yeah, and I've seen some warranty claims about that too, right? Where you didn't perform your services in a good professional and workmanlike manner because you didn't deploy X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, that's where I see or hear a lot of confusion around MSPs around that concept of gross negligence and warranty. I mean, that seems to be an area where they really struggle a lot.
Yeah. And if there isn't, to Melissa's point, if there isn't an explicit carve out in your limitation of liability for gross negligence, willful misconduct, fraud, a court might read that into it.
It's almost, Melissa, like your point with cyber insurance, it's like MSPs that aren't matching their actual policy with their controls or vice versa. That's where things also go really wrong. Oh, let's just get a bunch of template policies, and then all of a sudden, they don't match up with what you're doing. That things can go really bad that way also.
I mean, I'm not an insurance attorney. But I do see how insurance companies respond. A lot of times where you run into problems is if you say that you have something in place and it ends up you don't within an application, then you're misrepresenting yourself within an application. The other thing too, I think in the tech space, when you're looking at an MSP or even a technology company, the underwriting process to get insurance is much harder than for God love us all, law firms. And so you do have to make sure that the information that you're providing, the due diligence you're giving is correct. And if you're not matching what your procedures and processes say that you're doing, then you could run into problems with insurance.
Well, I'll kick this back to Eric. And even though you stayed at a Holiday Inn Express last night, I think you can easily answer the cyber insurance question. So that's
Yeah, and we've talked about how many times we've talked about cyber insurance and cyber insurance applications and all of that stuff on this call. It's you can get old episodes, Andrew.
I'll put it in on our new website, Eric.
So Melissa, back to you. So let's kind of talk nuts and bolts, right? You've got an outgoing MSP who is winding down their services to an account. You've got an incoming MSP who's ramping up their services in an account, and something goes horribly wrong. So who owns it? Is it the outgoing MSP? Is it the incoming MSP? What do you say, and what do you see the court saying?
So this really hasn't worked its way through the court because most of these cases are settling. They're not really going all the way through litigation to trial. So it's very hard to kind of see where the courts are going to come down on various things. The other challenge you have, if you're the outgoing MSP, there's a reason that your hands are no longer, keys on keyboard. So if something happens, usually you're not the one that they're contacting for any of the remediation or response type activities. They're often contacting the new party. So then you've got a problem about making sure that any information that you have, any kind of access that you have, any kind of logs or anything along those lines are preserved. Because if something happens and then they quickly remove everything that you had in the system, you're not going to be able to get back in to get any of that information. So you always, like, the first thing if something happens is you want to make sure, one, all of everything that you have that may be deployed on systems is locked down. Two, that you preserved all of the evidence that you legally have access to. And three, frankly, from my perspective, that you're responding to questions that they may have. Our systems are locked down. We've taken a look at it. Certainly, we're here to answer questions if you have, but you should direct your questions to your new MSP, because we don't want to get in the position where we're kind of arguing against ourselves with something. Look, that's not our system. That's your system. So it's cleaner for us to just lock everything down, kind of draw a line in the sand, and then do our own internal review and analysis. But it's always gray. There is never anything that's super black and white. There's always something like, well, I'm not sure. I think they migrated this device, but I'm not 100% sure yet if they migrated this device over to EDR, but we still have our sensor on it. It's never black and white.
So take a specific example, right? Let's say that an incoming MSP has deployed, their agents on 60% of the endpoints, and the outgoing MSP still has their agents on 40% of the endpoints, and then something horrible happens. How do you reconcile that?
Well, I need more facts, right? Like, because part of it is, where was the first evidence of activity? When did we first see it? Was it on the 60% or was it on the 40%? Then did they move laterally? Like, in the beginning of an investigation, it's too soon to say that. We can only say, we can only review what we do have access to. So, again, it comes back to making sure that what you have is locked down and that you've captured and preserved the information that you have and that you're analyzing that. And then often as you go through the analysis, you can see, hey, we see them accessing a system from an IP address we think is associated with the company. So we're not monitoring that. That's somebody else's. But you have to do your own investigation and your own due diligence to protect yourself, unfortunately, because the first thing they're going to do is they're not going to want to blame their new MSP. They just got a new MSP and this is supposed to be better secret sauce than the old one. So you've got some pride, I think, involved in that as well. Yeah, and I'd honestly like Chris's thoughts on that because I know he's done a lot of MSP investigations.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I've been in this situation before too. With you have like a company's acquired another company, and so they are running two different. They've connected the networks, but there's two different agents out there, right? And then it did take the full forensic investigation to determine, okay, where was the source? Did it come from the subsidiary, or did it come from the other company? And then that even determines whose insurance is at play and what coverage and stuff. So it can get, but the investigation is what tells you everything there. And hopefully the investigation is able to tell that story that the evidence is there to collect. So you can determine, okay, here's where it came in, and either tool A was supposed to do the job and it didn't, and here's why, and then this is why it spread, or whatever the case may be. But this whole kind of, unless you put it right, it's not black and white. I mean, I see a lot of people wrestle with this. I've seen situations where an incoming MSP can't do anything because the outgoing MSP refuses to turn anything over, and there's just all sorts of nastiness. So, I mean, this happens all the time. I mean, this is the thing that MSPs wrestle with every single day.
I mean, at the end of the day, the facts are the facts. Mm-hmm. So, which, you can see ideally in some respects where the footprints in the sand were leading to. So, but you don't want somebody to come back and start, not giving you the information that you need in order to say, no, it wasn't us, it was somebody else's system, because you didn't preserve the information, or you didn't get access to what you needed to, or you didn't have your stuff locked in down. So it's really about making sure you know what your house looks like before you start talking about what somebody else's house looks like.
Yeah, Eric, how important maybe in your contract, let's just say you couldn't get somebody to, put in a certain control, or, hey, we're not going to do logging, we're not going to pay for that. Is this kind of where maybe even your offboarding, you go, hey, this at this point is when we turn on logging for this period of time for that forensic, God forbid, situation? I mean,
Yeah, definitely. And coming up with just who's responsible for what and when is going to be super important. Again, trying to figure it out, 8 years after you've drafted the contract is tough. Sometimes you're gonna have to renegotiate and come up with a new document that speaks to that.
Got it. Hey, let's just close with this, Eric. Eric, because Ed asked a great question. He said, Eric, since terms of service will change from time to time, what is your recommended procedure for notifying clients when these changed, and how?
I'm not sure what terms of service mean, whether it's with the customer or with a third party, but
I think it's like something within the agreement, might have, hey, we added an MCP server, hypothetically. Let's just go with this. We added this AI thing that we're doing in, now at your organization. It wasn't previously in the scope of work. Now it is.
Yeah, it's all about documentation. It's all about change orders. It's all about, monthly true ups and making sure that what you're monitoring, what you're managing, what you're providing governance for is what your contract says you're doing that stuff for. And if it doesn't say that, then change it so that it does.
I mean, I think part of it too is, especially when you're dealing with like MSAs and terms and conditions and those types of things, you want to give yourself a mechanism for being able to modify those as the world changes, if you will. The problem is, sometimes requiring customers to cooperate is a little difficult, but you want to make sure you give yourself that ability, right? The customer will reasonably cooperate with any kind of changes to the contract.
Cool. All right.
I have a quick question though. This kind of reminds me. So if you have a client that's regulated and you have to keep audit logs, for example, for a certain number of years, and you're, and so then a new MSP is coming, who holds those logs? Like, do you have to hand all those logs? Is it back to the original organization? Is it to the next MSP? Because there are those rules, and then, what?
It's a great question, and it comes down to who's responsible for compliance. What I tell my MSP clients is that you should never be responsible for your customers' compliance. They are. If they need to maintain these logs for a certain period of time, then they need to contract with the appropriate people to maintain those logs for a certain period of time. That's got to belong to the end user customer. It shouldn't belong to the MSP.
I don't want the MSP holding on to logs after the period of time in which their contract ends. I want them to probably in the offboarding type process, work with the customer to make sure that they can transfer those logs over, and it's their responsibility. Because if something happens with the MSP, we're working, and this is a very small MSP, don't get me wrong, but we were working with a customer, a client, and the MSP got attacked and the backups all got deleted, and we went to go get more information and the MSP had passed. And so essentially the company immediately went out of business, couldn't get any more information. So anything they would have held on to, you're going into an estate trying to get it. So if the relationship is ended, I feel that you should work with the customer to make sure that you're transferring everything that they would need from them's compliance obligations over to them or over to their MSP at their direction.
Yeah, I could tell you, like when we did forensics, that's what we would do. When we were done with the forensics data, we would not want to hold on to that, but we knew that there could be the potential for it to be used in the future. So we would store that on a secured device and then provide that to the client. And then that was there, and we say, hey, look, you go lock it in the safe or do whatever you need to do, but that's your responsibility. We're done. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess I'll go next. I'll go second this time.
I feel like I'm in the hot seat.
Yeah. All right. So we have the outgoing MSP often still has domain admin, and I can attest to this. I see this a bajillion times. active credentials, and of course the tribal knowledge long after that last invoice has been sent out. At what point does this continued access become the responsibility of the former MSP or of the new MSP?
I think that's very difficult to answer, because are they using it? Do they have it? Is it compromised? Is it in play within whatever the particular incident is? Is it a proximate cause? Frankly, if you're done, if you're offboarded, if your relationship is done, if everything is done, turn it over. Be done with it. You don't want them coming back and saying, hey, we had an incident and it looks like they may have gotten the admin credentials from you and got access to our system, even though we have a new MSP. And so anything that you can, when your relationship is done, anything and everything that you can just terminate access and turn over, that's what you want to do. You don't want to hold on to it anymore, because it opens you up as an MSP for potential liability.
Yeah, I'd want some form of attestation or something on that.
Acknowledgement. We provided you all, kind of like that old, when somebody delivered something to your warehouse and you had the invoice sheet and you acknowledge that you got everything, right? Something like that.
Yeah, I tell you where I've seen, especially in the last couple of years, where mistakes are made is there's credentials left around from an old MSP, like even MSPs from 2 or 3 times ago,
yep,
or from an MSP that was acquired by a new MSP. So customer has this MSP, they get acquired, then this acquired one gets replaced, but they never go back and look at even those older credentials that belong to that initial MSP that they acquired. So that credential hygiene is terrible anyway, I would have to say, across the board,
yeah,
for MSPs, but this is really where it needs to focus on. So
if I'm the customer, right, and there's a hack that involved the prior MSP's credentials, I'm going after both. Because the new MSP didn't do the onboarding review and analysis of credentials that I feel as a customer should have happened to make sure my environment was secure. And 2, going after the old MSP because they obviously didn't do what they needed to ensure that their access to my system was terminated. And I'm going after both.
Yeah, go ahead, Andrew.
Yeah, Chris. So Ann asks about, and this might be an Eric question about, hey, I'm on my way out. What about changing passwords? I don't want to just hand over credentials, right, that are existing. Is there kind of recommendations you give there, Eric, when you do have to hand over the keys to the kingdom? And
you're on mute.
Sorry, it gets into a bit of a sticky situation because you as the MSP don't own the credentials. Your customer owns the credentials. Period, full stop. There's never a situation where the MSP, unless it's just on the MSP's tools themselves, there's no situation where the MSP owns the credentials. So if the customer asks for the credentials back, you have to give them the credentials back. You cannot hang on to them. I don't care if they owe you $1 million, you can't hang on to them. So what happens then, right? Can you require that after we hand them back, either we don't hand them back and we change them, or we do hand them back and then we require that they be changed? Absolutely. Either one of those scenarios would work, but we to a certain extent, unless the contract says something different, we have to turn over the credentials as is if we're ever asked for them.
Yeah, I don't think she's debating that, or just like what's the process when I hand them to you? Should they be rotated? Should you rotate them? But should that be in the contract?
It could be. Yeah, it certainly could be in the contract that they must be changed when we hand them over to you. That's absolutely a possibility.
Yeah,
I would actually say in the offboarding, right, an agreement that, hey, when we hand over the credentials, we're going to, if we can do a forced password change, we'll work with you to make sure that you understand that timing, but that way we no longer have access to your system. And put it that way, get their acknowledgement and go forward.
Yeah, I would say that's a good idea. I mean, we've seen too many MSPs use similar, maybe not the exact same credentials across their clients, but they may have a specific format or style that they do, and you want to just probably rotate those to something as random, which you should be doing already, so that you're not revealing anything that could put you as the MSP at risk of somebody breaking into you or your other clients. So
but one thing that I see come up much more often than that is the MSP isn't at the end of their contract, right? The MSP might have 6 months, 4 months, 3 months left on their contract, and the customer asks for the admin credentials back anyway. right? What does the MSP do there, right? They're responsible for the safety and security of the network, but they are now not the only holders of the admin credentials. Maybe the customer is asking for them back because they're going to give them to their new MSP, right? Now we've got 3 different organizations that have access to the same credentials, while me as the outgoing MSP is still responsible contractually to keep the environment safe.
So that's why I would say build into the contract. If at any time you require admin credentials, we are no longer responsible for this, the full security of your systems. Like at the beginning,
or treat it as a termination for convenience of the contract and collect an early termination fee and just get out.
I love both of those. So hey, I'm going to make sure we clip that. If you're listening, that last piece was gold. Like if you're getting asked for credentials 3 months before the end of your agreement, we all know what. I mean, we could go to Vegas and or Poly Market on the odds of that one, right, Eric? So
I mean, look, sometimes it's legit, right? Maybe sometimes the customer is bringing on an internal IT person and they need it, but still that drives the conversation and the need to amend the contract appropriately.
Well, it could be internal. It could be we're getting acquired.
Yeah, 1,000 different reasons.
Yeah, but some kind of language like
that's right.
You just said or Melissa said, I think is absolutely really well said.
Yeah, we should just close the show now. So
yeah, let's go. That was like the George Costanza moment.
Yeah. So I think we covered, I would say, so usually the client is the least sophisticated party, yet they're the one whose data is exposed. Legally, how much does a court expect the client to have understood about the security gaps in this transition?
So actually where we're seeing most of the requirements with respect to compliance is with the regulators. The courts will allow the parties to argue who's responsible for what compliance, but essentially the statutes and laws apply to the company that's acting in that particular industry. So, critical infrastructure, those types of requirements. HIPAA, you can have a covered entity, and then you have the business associate agreement, and then you have the sub-business associate agreement, and you can require them by contract to comply. But from a regulatory perspective, and there's actually some regulatory rulings out there, consent decrees that if you read it, and we're even seeing this in the AI space as well, it's the company that's responsible to ensure that their vendors are doing what they need to from a compliance perspective. And so from back over to Eric, from a contracting perspective, that's when that audit provision becomes incredibly important so that you can make sure your vendors are doing what they need to be doing to make sure that you're in compliance with your legal requirements.
All right. Yeah, no, that's important. It almost be like we need our own law and order MSP edition just to watch week by week how these things unfold. If you could insert one clause into every MSP transition statement of work tomorrow, what would that clause say?
Call your attorney before executing. No, I think it's the timing of the handoff. Like you have to have concrete timing of that handoff. You have to have whatever that trigger is to say, I am no longer responsible, or this company is no longer responsible, your new company is responsible. I don't think that most companies have that set in writing. So I think from my perspective, that's one of the most important things. But I think going back to that MSA that you executed, 3, 6, 10 years ago, you have to leave the mechanism for having that transition document or statement of work put together and agreed to by the parties. And I think that's primarily, in most MSPs, what's missing in their contract.
Yeah.
So Melissa, I know that it's never happened to anyone on this call, but sometimes there's a breakdown in the relationship, right? And the MSP and the customer just don't like each other anymore. And you brought up a great point that says, well, you have to account for it in the MSA that's originally signed. Otherwise, the customer can just say, no, I'm not going to sign any transition, statement of work. You're going to deliver, as you say, you're going to deliver, then I'm going to bring in my new person, right? So how do you with specificity get to the point where you can't get in a situation where the customer just refuses to sign off on the transition? I mean, how specific do you have to get in the MSA to make that happen?
So since you're the MSA contracting expert, Eric, I don't think that's a fair question to ask me. But since you did ask me, I would say the termination for convenience. You have to give yourself the ability for termination convenience. I think also the customer, what's that language? Can't unreasonably object. And so you give yourself that additional language to make sure that they have to cooperate with respect to the offboarding and transition.
Okay.
All right, now it's your turn, Felicity.
Got it. So, MSPs hear the word indemnification. They're not the only ones, but many organizations, and they assume that they're protected. So when you are going through this transition from one MSP to another, where does this fall down? And that language around indemnification, it doesn't apply to them.
So there's a lot of nuances in indemnification language, and a lot of times it is directed by or controlled by some of the state laws, and so you have to be aware of where that applies. Like I talked about before, in some states you can't contract around your own gross negligence, and so if they allege that you're grossly negligent, then they try to get outside the terms of the contract. For those states that don't contract around that, you need to make sure that's included as well. The other thing too is that often you'll see things like, can't recover for lost profits, but don't talk about lost data or downtime or those types of things. So it's really about how the indemnification language is crafted. The other thing too is that often I think when I see indemnification contracts that essentially exclude everything and really don't give the customer much of an opportunity to recover, those are the ones that I see people fight over more. Where if you have, you can recover up to 6 months, 6 months for, or up to 6 months of the last, whatever amount paid over that time period, you've at least given them some recovery and you can limit the amount to that. I find that having some sort of numerical determination of what that recovery will look like often means that there's less fights over kind of the gray zone within the indemnification language.
Very good. So we did talk about cybersecurity and trying to figure out who's responsible for what. I mean, cyber insurance, and who's responsible for what when there happens to be a breach during a transition. And so, how do you get through that ambiguity? What happens to a claim when the breach did occur during the transition? Who pays, who doesn't pay? How do we use that? How do you get through that ambiguity to figure out who can deny the claim and who has to actually pay up?
So, again, I'm not an insurance attorney, so I'll just talk about this from my experience. If you have a customer that has had a cyber incident and the MSP is, there's that offboarding process, if you will, usually the MSP can submit that to insurance, and insurance will pay for a third party to come in and assist with a forensic investigation of the information that the MSP has, so that the MSP can actually have its own information kind of set there to determine what occurred and what didn't. And then the customer with their insurance would do their own investigation as well. And then generally, they would take a look at both of those and see where most likely the incident originated from. And that may decide from an insurance perspective who's responsible for what. On the other side of it, though, if we're not talking like hundreds of thousands of dollars, often insurance will just allow the two different insurance companies to cover what it is that they covered and won't go after the other party. From an insurance perspective. Now, the company can do so, and certainly the MSP can do so, although usually they don't want to go after their customer because they want them to continue to be a customer. So there is some nuances there, but it really does come back to that investigation that you do to make sure your house is in order before you start pointing fingers at the other house.
Got it. I mean, that's interesting. So I just kind of have a follow-on question. So the incident happens, but then let's say like the date passes, right? So like I'm the old MSP and we're 30 days out, incident happens, but then, the investigation, the recovery, all that stuff maybe goes past my handover date right? So it's like, okay, July 15th, the new guy takes over, I'm done, right? Like, what is my obligation as the old MSP when like the dates pass? Like, it's like, okay, I gave everything over. What is my obligation to help out now? Like, even though the investigation's ongoing and all of that, but the transition date is passed.
I'd renegotiate that termination date just in case that there's additional information they want from me. I'd want it to be covered under that contract, whatever the contract terms are. If you don't have a contract in place, then it's going to come down to the courts to determine whether or not you're obligated to assist or provide information. Generally, underlying facts are not privileged, so they can go to court. They can, bring you in. They can do a deposition, they can issue a subpoena, they can get access to some of the information. So it's looking at it, I think, strategically. If the information we have shows that, hey, nothing happened on our side, we weren't attacked, there was no compromise of our system, we've had an independent party validate it. Is there a harm to you as an MSP for sharing that? I would say 95% of the time, no, but 5% you have an idiot, sorry about that, customer who won't believe anything you say anyway, until maybe you just walk away and they've given you everything you need to. So I think it's a case-by-case basis. But if they want more assistance or information or anything like that from me, I'd prefer to extend the terms of that contract until everything is done and we can just walk away.
That's so you're covered, right, Melissa? Yeah.
Got it.
But be really, really careful about continuing to provide services outside of extending that contract. You don't want to be in a position where you continue to do something that you're not obligated to do in the event something bad happens.
Yeah, good, really good advice.
Got it. So for the MSP owner listening right now, who may be in mid-transition on a client this week, and then, of course, like you all said, like they don't really have well-defined handoff terms. What should they do?
They should pray.
Get down on their knees.
Go back, sit down with the customer. Go back, sit down with the customer and walk through it. Hey, I was just thinking about this and I want to make sure that we're clear on, the relationship and I want to make sure you're okay. You understand when we're no longer responsible for X, Y, and Z and that your new person is taking over and that we're all on the same page here. Like put it in the terms of you want to make sure they're taken care of, but really you're looking out for your own best interests.
Got it. I mean, I guess.
And then pray.
Yeah. I mean, you probably should have your lawyer involved since there's no template and it really is like, maybe you hadn't thought about it. I mean, do you think that it's best also to, get with your lawyer to figure out like what really should be written down during this transition time?
In the background, I think so. But I don't think with respect to engaging with the customer, because people tend to get a little nervous when there's attorneys like, oh, is this an adversarial relationship?
Right.
No. And, Eric and I are super friendly, but, we can certainly give a template and talk through the type of information you need to have. And then you go work through it with the customer and take a quick look afterwards to make sure it's all in place.
Hey, one question I had, because this gets into a debate too, when you're talking about, you have to know about other states' laws and stuff. So let's say you in your MSA, you have your language in there that is governed by the state of Texas or whatever. That necessarily doesn't isolate you from having to adhere as an MSP to the other laws if your client's in Massachusetts or Illinois or anything like that. Is that right?
So two different things, right? So the law that applies to the interpretation of the contracts, that would be within the MSA, right? So how you're going to interpret the contract is according to Texas law. Now, if you're the one maintaining their databases and doing those types of things, and it's all Massachusetts data, then, the type of security controls and other things that may need to be in place in your written information security program may need to make sure that you have those Massachusetts type of wickets in there, but the interpretation of the contract would be Texas.
Gotcha.
It's almost like, Melissa, you have to respect GDPR or CCPA or whatever. You can't just disregard that if you're doing business.
If it's in the contract, and then only as it pertains to that particular information. So not across the board. In all of that, all of those laws pertain to personal information.
Okay.
Interesting. So the last question for you, of all the cases that you have worked, if you were advising an MSP on a single mindset shift that would protect them during these kinds of transitions, what would it be? Would it be, hey, assume you're responsible until proven otherwise, or is there something else that you would advise them on?
I saw this question and I was thinking about it, and I'm still thinking about it because I think, especially for the MSPs who are participating in these types of conversations, a bit of that mind shift's already happened. Like they're already doing, better contracts. They already have better documentation in place. I'm a big fan of trust but verify, right? So I'm not saying you close all your windows, lock all your doors, don't talk to your customer until you know exactly what's going on. You have to still have that type of communication. But I do think that if there's any risk that it might have something that touched your system as a MSP, you need to verify that your house is clean. One, because it's going to help your customer learn from their perspective what happened. Two, it puts you in a better position because you have this independent third party that's essentially said there's no issues with respect to you. And the services and the tools that you provided. So I do think it is like you really need to make sure, especially in today's society where we're seeing so many more demands and lawsuits and questions from customers who are getting hit by different events. I think that the MSP really does need to make sure its house is in order, even as it is going through and assisting the company. It's interesting. I've worked so many of these. I still remember MSP, a couple different MSPs were like, it wasn't us, we have everything in place. And then you find out that their RMM tool didn't have MFA on it. And that was the first entry, or they were responsible for maintaining and patching the firewall. Not only did they not do that when they went to, clean it up, they reverted back to a bad version. I mean, like I could give you all of the horror stories, like across the board. So you have to make sure that your house is in order, even if you are still helping I guess I like analogies, even if you are still helping your neighbor mow their lawn.
Nice. Melissa, we have a minute, it's about 2 minutes left. You mentioned, you don't work as an attorney for insurance companies, and I'm paraphrasing. We know most people that know Eric, it's the MSAs, the SCOWs, it's commercial, it's, HR, things like that. Can you give everybody a sense of why and when they would work with you, and, why MSPs build relationships, even though there may not be an active breach going on, knock on wood?
Yeah, definitely. And by saying I don't work with insurance, I don't represent insurance companies, so I'm not reviewing the policy, but we are on panel for a number of insurance companies. And so if somebody has insurance and they need assistance with investigating or responding, then we would help out there. We also help companies with respect to their incident response plans. We've got a crisis communication team internal that are not attorneys that will help put together those communication plans, which honestly is one of the most important aspects. How do you communicate? What do you communicate? Doing those types of things. And so we really focus a lot in the incident response space to make sure that the companies are prepared and ready to respond. And then if something does happen, assist the organization with navigating those aspects, any regulatory investigations, et cetera. So
appreciate you sharing that. And I couldn't agree more that the communication piece is, just absolutely so critical that a lot of people, it's like, I remember having Clark Harshberger on when he was heading up incident response for CrowdStrike. And he even said, hey, look, your incident response plan, great. It's important. Tabletops, great. They're important. But he said, I've yet to see one kind of get enacted during an actual, it's like, who's your who's on your comms? Like, who are the people that you really got to get to, in terms of that list? And then what's your plan for communication? Because that's where things can go horribly wrong.
Especially with MSPs, because there's a ripple effect. So as your clients are impacted, their clients are impacted. It's a huge ripple effect. I mean, I've worked with Melissa on a number of these. I would say when it comes to the MSPs, the communication is incredibly involved.
Yeah. Good point. Awesome. Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today. It was awesome having you. I hope you'll come back. I'm excited for hearing what you and maybe Eric have in store. Like there was already, suggestions of a Law and Order type thing. So I know Eric plays a great iced tea. Anyway, we'll look forward to hearing more about what you guys have in store. Chris, thanks for filling in. Phyllis, as always, thank you. Eric, great seeing you. Thanks for jumping on. And everybody, thanks for sitting in. We'll see you next Monday. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
If you're in the Write a Boom community but not in our Discord yet, you're missing where the real conversation happens. Join community.writeaboom.com to access CyberCall discussions, upcoming CTFs, boom camps, and early access to what's coming next. If you want to stay close to what's actually happening in the MSP security space, I'll see you there.